My husband died years ago, and every single month, without fail, I sent his mother $200. I thought it was love. I thought it was duty. I thought it was right. But one envelope, one sentence, changed everything I believed about my marriage, my grief, and the woman I trusted most. If you believe loyalty should never be punished, subscribe to this channel. If you think family secrets always surface eventually, comment where you're watching from, and share your thoughts as the story unfolds. My husband, Daniel, died on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The kind of rain that seeps into your bones and makes the whole world feel heavier. The doctor used words like sudden and unexpected, but none of them explained how a healthy man could kiss his wife goodbye in the morning and be gone before dinner. 1 minute, I was deciding what to cook that night. The next, I was sitting on a cold hospital bench, staring at a wall that felt too white, too clean, for something so cruel. The first year after his death passed in a blur. Grief has a strange way of bending time. Days crawled, but months disappeared. I learned how to sleep on one side of the bed. I learned how to eat dinner alone, without crying into my plate most nights. I learned how to answer the question, "Are you okay?" with a polite nod instead of the truth. Daniel's mother, Margaret, became my anchor in those early months, or at least, that's what I believed. She called every Sunday evening without fail. Her voice was always soft, tired, heavy with sorrow. She talked about Daniel as if he were still a little boy who scraped his knees and needed her to kiss the pain away. "He was my whole world," she'd say, and I'd answer, every time, "Mine too." Margaret lived alone in a small apartment, 2 states away. Daniel was her only child. His father had passed years before, and after Daniel died, she told me she felt like the last leaf clinging to a bare tree. I couldn't bear the thought of her struggling alone, especially knowing how much Daniel loved her. Money was never mentioned at first, not directly. It slipped into the conversation slowly, like a shadow lengthening at sunset. "The rent went up again," she said once, sighing. "My medication costs more these days." Another time, "I don't know how I'll manage this winter," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to make my chest tighten. I didn't have much myself. Daniel and I weren't rich. We lived comfortably, carefully. After his death, I survived on my salary and the small life insurance payout, most of which went toward clearing debts and funeral costs. But every time Margaret hinted at her struggles, I heard Daniel's voice in my head, "Take care of my mom." So I made a decision, quietly. No grand announcement, no discussion. Every month, on the first Friday, I sent Margaret $200. At first, it felt good, like I was doing something meaningful with my grief, like my love for Daniel hadn't died with him. Margaret cried when I told her, "You don't have to do this," she said. "I want to," I replied, and I meant it. The money became routine. I adjusted my budget, fewer dinners out, no vacations. I told myself sacrifices were part of love, even after death. Margaret thanked me every month, sometimes with long messages, sometimes with short notes, always grateful, always sad. Years passed. 5 years, to be exact. In that time, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. I got a promotion at work. I moved to a smaller but brighter apartment. I learned how to laugh again without guilt. I even went on a few dates, though none of them lasted long. My heart was cautious, guarded, still bruised. Through it all, the $200 kept going out, month after month, no matter what. Then, one afternoon, as I was sorting through mail I'd been neglecting, I noticed something odd. An envelope addressed to Margaret had been delivered to my apartment by mistake. Same building number, different city listed, but somehow it ended up in my box. It looked official, thick paper, stamped seal. I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't open it. It wasn't mine, but something about it made my fingers tighten around the edges. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was instinct, or maybe, deep down, a part of me already sensed the truth creeping closer. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the kitchen table and walked away. Made tea. Tried to distract myself, but my eyes kept drifting back to that envelope, sitting there like it had something to say. Finally, I picked it up. Inside was a notice from a retirement fund administrator. My heart started pounding before I even finished the first paragraph. It mentioned monthly automatic deposits, a balance that made my mouth go dry. Margaret wasn't struggling. She was receiving money, a lot more than I ever imagined. I reread the letter 3 times, hoping I misunderstood, hoping grief had finally made me delusional. But the numbers didn't change. The words stayed the same. My hands trembled as I lowered the paper. For the first time in 5 years, I felt something other than sadness or duty toward my mother-in-law. I felt confused. And beneath that confusion, a quiet, unsettling sense of betrayal. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every sigh, every trembling pause in Margaret's voice. I thought about the $200 I sent every month without question, the things I gave up, the times I told myself love meant never asking for proof. By morning, one question echoed louder than all the others. Why did she need my money, if she already had so much? And that was only the beginning. For days after opening that envelope, I carried the truth around like a stone in my chest. I went to work, smiled at colleagues, answered emails, attended meetings, yet every quiet moment was filled with numbers and memories colliding in my mind. The figures from the retirement notice replayed themselves over and over, mocking me. Margaret wasn't just getting by. She was comfortable, more than comfortable. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe the money was new. Maybe it was a recent benefit she hadn't told me about yet. Maybe she planned to explain but hadn't found the right words. I wanted desperately to believe there was an innocent explanation. After all, this was the woman who gave birth to the man I loved, the woman who cried with me at his funeral and held my hands when I could barely stand. So, I called her. She answered on the third ring. Just like always. "Hello, sweetheart," she said, her voice warm, familiar. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I replied, though my throat felt tight. "How about you?" She sighed, a practiced sigh, one I'd heard countless times. "Oh, one day at a time." I almost laughed. Almost. We chatted about nothing at first: the weather, her neighbor's noisy dog, a television show she'd been watching. My palms grew sweaty as the conversation drifted, dangerously close to ending without me saying what I needed to say. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Margaret," I said slowly, "can I ask you something?" There was a brief pause. "Of course, I received some mail by accident," I continued, choosing my words carefully. "It was addressed to you." Another pause, longer this time. "What kind of mail?" she asked. Daughter took a breath. "It looked like a financial statement. From a retirement fund." Silence. The line stayed open, but I could hear nothing on the other end. No breathing, no background noise. Just empty space stretching between us. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "I didn't mean to open it," I added quickly, though that wasn't entirely true. "But I did, and now I'm confused." Her voice finally returned, softer than before. "Oh, just one word." "Oh, double quotes, Margaret," I said. "You told me you were struggling, that you barely made rent, that your medication was expensive, but that letter said you receive monthly payments, substantial ones." Another sigh, different this time, heavy, defensive. "That money is Daniel's," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "It's from his father," she explained. "A survivor benefit. It's not much when you consider everything." I clenched my jaw. "It's more than what I make in a month." "That's none of your business," she snapped suddenly, the softness gone. The shift in her tone felt like a slap. I froze. In 5 years, she had never spoken to me like that. "I didn't mean," I started. "You're young," she interrupted. "You can work, you can rebuild your life. I'm old, alone. I lost my husband and my son. Do you know what that's like?" The familiar guilt rose instantly, just as it always did. She knew exactly which strings to pull. "I know losing Daniel nearly destroyed me," I said quietly. "Yes, and he was my child," she shot back. "So don't stand there counting my money as if you're entitled to it." Entitled. The word echoed in my ears. "I'm not asking for your money," I said. "I'm asking why you let me believe you needed mine." Her breathing grew uneven. "Because you offered." "I offered because I thought you were struggling," I replied. "Because you implied you were." She didn't deny it. "Well," I pressed. There was a long silence before she spoke again. "If you're done helping me," she said coldly, "just say so." That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the years I'd sacrificed without question. Just a challenge wrapped in wounded pride. "I need time to think," I said finally. "Fine," she replied. "Do whatever you want." The call ended abruptly. I stared at my phone, my reflection faintly visible on the dark screen. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She looked tired, older than she should have, and suddenly, I realized something that made my stomach twist. Margaret never thanked me anymore, not genuinely. She expected the money. It was an obligation now, a debt I didn't even know I owed. That night, I pulled out my bank statements. 5 years, 60 months, $12,000. $12,000 I could have used to build a safety net, to travel, to save, to breathe a little easier. Instead, it disappeared quietly, sent away with love and trust I was no longer sure it was deserved. As I stared at the numbers, memories surfaced, little things I'd brushed off at the time. The way Margaret once mentioned buying new furniture, the casual reference to a short getaway she took with a friend, the expensive coat she wore during one winter visit. I had noticed, I just hadn't wanted to connect the dots. Grief makes you generous, but it also makes you blind. The next morning, I didn't send the transfer. It felt strange, almost wrong, like breaking a sacred ritual. My finger hovered over the confirmation button for a long time before I closed the app entirely. My heart raced, waiting for something bad to happen, as if the universe would punish me instantly for choosing myself. Nothing happened. Days passed, then a week. Margaret didn't call. At first, I felt relieved, then uneasy, and finally, angry. 5 years of loyalty, 5 years of quiet sacrifice, and the moment I hesitated, I was met with silence. On the 10th day, my phone rang. It was her, I answered. Why didn't I receive the money? She demanded, skipping any greeting. I swallowed hard, because I needed answers first. You're punishing me, she said sharply. No, I replied. I'm protecting myself. She scoffed. Daniel would be ashamed of you. That did it. Something inside me snapped out loudly, but cleanly, like a rope finally giving way after being pulled too tight for too long. Don't use him against me, I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest. You don't get to speak for him. You've changed, she said bitterly. Yes, I answered, I have, and for the first time since Daniel died, I realized that maybe change wasn't betrayal, maybe it was survival. But what I didn't know, yet what I couldn't have imagined, was that the money wasn't the worst secret Margaret was hiding from me, not even close. After that call, something shifted inside me permanently. It wasn't rage or grief this time, it was clarity, a sharp, uncomfortable clarity that refused to let me slip back into the familiar role of the dutiful widow-in-law. I went through my days with a strange sense of alertness, as if I'd been walking through fog for years and had finally stepped into open air. Margaret didn't call again for nearly 3 weeks. Those weeks were quieter than I expected. Painful, yes, but also revealing. Without her weekly sighs and subtle guilt, my mind had space to wander, to question, to remember. And the more I remembered, the more uneasy I became. Daniel and I had been married for 7 years before he died. 7 solid, loving years, or so I believed. We argued like normal couples, worried about bills, talked about kids we planned to have someday. There was nothing dramatic, nothing suspicious. He was kind, reliable, predictable in the best way. But now, memories began rearranging themselves. Little moments resurfaced. Times when Daniel abruptly changed the subject if his mother came up. The tension in his jaw whenever money was mentioned. The way he insisted on handling certain paperwork himself. I had once teased him about being secretive, and he'd laughed it off, kissed my forehead, and said, "It's boring adult stuff. You don't want to know." At the time, I didn't push. Now I wished I had. One Saturday morning, driven by a restless energy I couldn't shake, I decided to visit Margaret in person. I didn't tell her I was coming. Part of me hoped she wouldn't be home so I could drop off the misdelivered mail and leave. Another part of me wanted answers, real ones, not evasions wrapped in emotional manipulation. Her apartment building was nicer than I remembered, cleaner, updated. When I last visited years ago, the lobby carpet had been worn and dull. Now, it looked freshly replaced. The elevator had been renovated too. Stainless steel, digital display. Interesting, I thought. Margaret answered the door, wearing a crisp sweater and neatly styled hair. She looked, well, not fragile, not struggling, not anything like the image she painted over the phone. "Oh," she said, clearly surprised. "You should have called. I wanted to talk," I replied. She stepped aside reluctantly and let me in. Her apartment told a story she never had. New furniture, a large flat-screen TV, decor that looked curated rather than inherited or outdated. Nothing extravagant, but nothing desperate either. We sat across from each other in silence for a moment. "I didn't expect you," she said finally. "I know," I answered. That was the point. Her lips tightened. "If this is about the money, it's about honesty," I cut in. "I deserve it." She scoffed lightly. "You always think you deserve explanations." I stared at her, stunned. This wasn't the grieving, gentle woman I knew. This was someone else, entirely someone sharper, guarded, resentful. I sent you money for 5 years, I said calmly, out of love, out of respect for Daniel. I never questioned you. I never asked for proof. The least you can do is tell me the truth. Margaret stood abruptly and walked to the window, crossing her arms. You wouldn't understand. Try me. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Daniel owed me. The words hit me harder than I expected. Owed you? What? I asked. Everything, she replied. I sacrificed my life for him. That's what parents do, I said gently. No, she snapped, turning around. That's what I did. His father left us with nothing. I worked 2 jobs. I gave up opportunities, dreams. And when Daniel started making good money, he promised he'd take care of me. My chest tightened. He did take care of you. You receive benefits, retirement funds, survivor payments. That wasn't enough, she said flatly. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. So you let me believe you were struggling because you wanted more. She didn't deny it. You're young, she repeated. You still had your life ahead of you. I lost mine. The entitlement in her voice was unmistakable now. And Daniel, I asked, did he know you felt this way? Her eyes flickered. That was all the answer I needed. What aren't you telling me? I pressed. Jawed. She hesitated, then waved her hand dismissively. It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me, I said, because every time I sent you money, I believed I was honoring my husband. Margaret looked at me, then really looked at me with something close to annoyance. Daniel lied to you. The room seemed to tilt. About what? I whispered. She sighed, as if tired of holding something in. About how much he gave me. About how often. About why. My heart pounded violently. Why? Because if you knew, she said slowly, you might have asked questions. What questions? I demanded. She walked back to her chair and sat, folding her hands in her lap. Questions about where his money actually went. The silence that followed felt suffocating. What are you saying? I asked. Margaret leaned forward slightly. Daniel was sending me money long before he died. Large amounts, much more than you ever did. I shook my head. That's not possible. We shared finances. I would have noticed. She smiled faintly. Not everything went through the accounts you saw. My breath caught. He had a separate account, she continued. One I helped him open. The betrayal burned hotter now, not just from her, but from the memory of Daniel himself. Why? For protection, she said. From you. The words cut deep. I stood up, my legs trembling. From me? You were his wife, she said, which meant you had claims, expectations, rights. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this woman with the one I once trusted. You're telling me my husband hid money from me because you told him to. I told him to be smart, she corrected. Marriage doesn't last forever. Mothers do. My vision blurred. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. She shrugged. Because you stopped paying, that was it. No remorse, no apology, just leverage. I walked out without another word. In my car, I broke down, not loudly, but deeply. The kind of crying that feels like something tearing loose inside your chest. I cried for the man I loved, and for the version of him I was suddenly unsure existed. I cried for the years I spent honoring a lie. Bob beneath the grief, something else began to form. Resolve. That night, I pulled out every document I had: bank statements, insurance papers, tax records. I requested old records I'd never bothered to examine closely. I searched for that separate account Margaret mentioned, and after hours of digging, I found it: an account in Daniel's name, with transactions I didn't recognize, transfers I couldn't explain, and one recurring payment that made my blood run cold. It wasn't just to Margaret, there was someone else. Someone Daniel had been sending money to, every single month, just like I had. And suddenly, the question wasn't just why Margaret lied. It was who else had been living in the shadows of my marriage, and what else my husband had taken to his grave. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. The name on the recurring payment wasn't familiar, yet something about it felt unsettlingly personal. It wasn't a business, it wasn't a utility. It was a person's name, a woman's name, every month. Same date, same amount. My hands shook as I scrolled back through the transaction history. The payments went back years farther than my own transfers to Margaret. Even during months when Daniel and I had argued about tightening our budget. Even during the year we postponed a vacation because money was a little tight. I felt sick. I closed the laptop, stood up, and paced my apartment like a trapped animal. My mind raced, filling in blanks with possibilities I didn't want to accept. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Daniel was dead. He couldn't explain himself, and yet, the evidence sat there, cold and undeniable. Eventually, I reopened the laptop. I searched the name. At first, nothing. Then, a social media profile appeared, private, but with the profile picture visible. A woman in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. Dark hair. A child standing beside her, his face partially turned away from the camera. My breath caught. The boy looked familiar, in a way that made my chest ache. Something about the shape of his face, the slope of his nose, the way he stood, slightly angled, hands tucked into his jacket pockets. I slammed the laptop shut again. No, I whispered aloud to the empty room, but the thought had already taken root, spreading fast and poisonous. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in years. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold as I stared at nothing. Around noon, I finally gathered the courage to do what I'd been avoiding. I messaged the woman. I kept it simple, polite, controlled. Hello, my name is Anna. I believe you knew my husband, Daniel. I recently came across some financial records and had a few questions. I hope that's okay. I stared at the message for a full minute before hitting send. She replied 2 hours later. I've been expecting this message. My heart dropped. Can we talk? She added. We agreed on a call that evening. The hours leading up to it felt unbearable. I tried to prepare myself for anything, but nothing could have braced me for the truth that came out of her mouth the moment she spoke. My name is Claire, she said softly, and Daniel is my son's father. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table so hard, my fingers went numb. How old is he? I asked, my voice barely recognizable as my own. 8. She answered. 8. Daniel had been dead for 5 years, which meant he was 3 when Daniel died. I whispered, yes. I swallowed hard. Did my husband know? Claire was quiet for a moment. Yes. That single word shattered something deep inside me. She told me everything then, not dramatically, not defensively, just facts, delivered with a sadness that felt genuine. She and Daniel had met years ago before our marriage. They dated briefly. When she found out she was pregnant, Daniel had already started seeing me. He chose to marry me. He promised Claire he would support their child financially, but didn't want to be involved publicly. He said it would ruin your life, she said, and mine. Tears streamed down my face. So, instead, he lived a lie. Yes, the money transfers weren't gifts. They were child support, unofficial, quiet, hidden. He loved his son, Claire said. In his own way, he visited when he could, always secretly. He made me promise never to contact you. My chest felt tight, like there wasn't enough air. And my mom? I asked. She knew, Claire replied. Of course she did. Margaret knew about the child. She helped Daniel hide the account. She helped him control the narrative. And after his death, she let me take over, stepping neatly into the role Daniel once played, without ever telling me the truth. I ended the call feeling hollow. For years, I believed I was honoring my husband's memory. In reality, I had been unknowingly financing the aftermath of his lies, supporting a woman and child he never fully claimed, and a mother who believed entitlement outweighed honesty. Anger finally rose, not explosive, but steady and consuming. I called Margaret. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail. I know about the child, I said calmly. I know everything, and we are going to talk whether you want to or not. That night, I sat alone, replaying my marriage from beginning to end. I questioned every late meeting, every unexplained expense, every moment I'd dismissed as harmless. I mourned not just the man I lost, but the marriage I thought I had. The next morning, Margaret showed up at my apartment unannounced. Her face was pale, her posture rigid. So, she said as soon as I opened the door, you found out. Yes, I replied. And now you're going to tell me why you thought it was okay to let me keep paying you. She looked me straight in the eye and said, because someone had to take responsibility. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. I already did, I said, for 5 years, without consent, without truth. She crossed her arms. You benefited from Daniel's choices. How? I demanded. By being lied to. He gave you a home, a name, stability, and he gave you a secret child. I shot back. One you used against me. Margaret's expression hardened. That child is blood. So was I said quietly. I was his wife. She had no answer to that dot for the first time. I saw her not as a grieving mother, but as a woman who believed love was a transaction, and truth was optional if the outcome benefited her. I'm done, I said. No more money, no more lies, no more manipulation. You can't just walk away, she hissed. Daniel wouldn't allow it. Daniel wasn't here anymore, and for the first time, I understood that I didn't owe his secrets my silence. As Margaret stormed out, one thought echoed clearly in my mind. The money was never about need, it was about control, and now, that control was gone. But the consequences of exposing the truth were only just beginning, because soon, the child's existence would no longer be a secret, and when it wasn't, everything would change. After Margaret left, my apartment felt different, lighter, yet unbearably quiet. The confrontation had drained me in a way I didn't expect. I thought anger would give me energy, but instead it left a hollow ache behind my ribs. I sat on the couch long after the door closed, staring at the spot where she had stood, replaying every word, every look. For the first time since Daniel's death, I didn't miss him. That realization scared me. I missed the man I thought he was, the version who didn't exist. Over the next few days, the truth settled into my life like dust after a collapse coating everything, impossible to ignore. I told no one, not my friends, not my coworkers. I carried it alone, unsure how to explain a betrayal that came from someone who could no longer defend himself. But the silence didn't last. Claire called me again. I wasn't sure if I should, she said hesitantly. But Margaret contacted me. My stomach tightened. What did she say? She's angry, Claire replied. She said you were trying to destroy Daniel's memory, that you were selfish. She hinted that, if I didn't stay quiet, things could get complicated. That was Margaret's specialty, threats, wrapped in righteousness. I'm sorry, I said. I never wanted you dragged into this. I know, Claire replied softly, but I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll hear me out. I braced myself. Go ahead. She's been helping me financially too, Claire admitted. Since Daniel died, not much, just enough to make sure I didn't go to court. I closed my eyes. Margaret had been distributing money like leverage, just enough to keep everyone dependent, quiet, and controlled. I don't want anything from you, Claire continued quickly. I never did. I don't want her controlling my son's future. Her words struck something deep in me. Neither do I said. That night, I made a decision I never imagined I'd make. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer. Not out of revenge, not out of greed, but out of necessity. I needed to understand my rights and Daniel's obligations clearly. The lawyer listened carefully as I explained everything: the hidden account, the child, Margaret's manipulation, the money I'd been sending. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. You were exploited, she said plainly. Hearing it out loud made my chest tighten. Legally, she continued, you were under no obligation to support your mother, and depending on how those funds were presented to you, there may be grounds to recover some of that money. I shook my head. I don't want it back. She studied me for a moment. Then what do you want? I thought of Claire's son, of the way his face resembled Daniel's, of the life he didn't choose. I want this to end, I said, cleanly. The lawyer nodded. Then you'll need boundaries and documentation. Margaret doesn't sound like someone who lets go easily. She was right. 2 days later, Margaret called me, calmer this time, controlled, dangerous. I've been thinking, she said, we shouldn't fight. Daniel wouldn't want that. I almost laughed at how predictably she invoked his name. What do you want, Margaret? I asked. To settle this, like adults, she replied. We can come to an arrangement. An arrangement, I repeated. Yes, she said. You continue sending the money. Less, if you insist. And we all move on. No, I said simply. Her breath hitched. You don't understand the consequences. I understand them perfectly, I replied, and I accept them. Her voice dropped. If you stop supporting me, people will ask questions. Let them, I said. You'll ruin his reputation. He ruined it himself, I answered quietly. That was the moment she lost control. Her voice rose, sharp and venomous. You're an ungrateful woman. After everything that family gave you, I interrupted. You took silence. Then, in a low, threatening tone, she said, if you think this ends here, you're mistaken. The call ended. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. Instead, I felt something close to peace. That weekend, I met Claire in person. We chose a small cafe halfway between our cities. She brought her son. I hadn't expected that. He was shy, polite, He thanked me when I bought him hot chocolate. When he smiled, my chest tightened painfully. I didn't tell him who I was. I didn't need to. This wasn't about claiming anything, it was about acknowledging reality. Claire and I talked for hours, about Daniel, about lies, about survival. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, tears in her eyes. I know, I replied, and I meant it. Before we parted, I handed her an envelope. What's this? She asked. Not money, I said quickly. Information, a lawyer's contact, in case Margaret tries to pressure you again. Her shoulders sagged in relief. Thank you. As I drove home, I realized something profound. For years, I had been loyal to the dead. Now, I was choosing the living, and that choice was about to cost me more than I realized, because Margaret wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Margaret's retaliation didn't come loudly. It came quietly, through whispers, omissions, and carefully placed lies. I didn't see it at first. I felt its subtle shifts in how people spoke to me, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, the polite distance that hadn't been there before. It started with a message from Daniel's cousin. I heard some troubling things. Are you okay? I asked what she meant. Thought her reply took hours. Margaret says, you cut her off financially and turned your back on the family. She's worried about you. I stared at my phone, stunned by the audacity. Worried about me. Over the next few weeks, more messages came. Some direct, some vague, some laced with judgment masked as concern. You know she's old, right? Family doesn't abandon family. Daniel would never have wanted this. Margaret had activated her old friends, anyone who still associated my name with Daniel's. She painted herself as the grieving, abandoned mother and me as the cold widow who forgot her place. And for the first time, I fought back, not with anger, with truth. I didn't blast it on social media. I didn't argue point by point. I simply responded calmly, privately, consistently. There's more to the story. I supported her for 5 years voluntarily. I stopped when I discovered significant dishonesty. Some believed me, some didn't, but the more Margaret pushed, the less control she had. Then came the letter. An official-looking envelope arrived one morning, stamped with a legal firm's name. My heart jumped as I opened it, bracing for a lawsuit. Instead, it was a demand letter, cold, impersonal, threatening. Margaret was claiming financial dependency. She alleged that Daniel had promised lifelong support and that I had assumed responsibility after his death by providing regular payments. She demanded back payments and continued monthly. She would pursue legal remedies. I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was desperate. I forwarded the letter to my lawyer immediately. She doesn't have a case, my lawyer said after reviewing it, but she's hoping you don't know that. The words felt empowering. We responded formally, outlining the facts, documenting the voluntary nature of the payments, and stating clearly that all future contact should go through legal counsel. Margaret exploded. She called, texted, left voicemails, some pleading, some furious, some downright cruel. You owe me. You wouldn't exist in this family without me. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you are. I didn't respond. Silence became my shield. Then, something unexpected happened. Claire called me, shaken. She showed up at my place. She said, Margaret, she brought documents. She said she was taking over. My blood ran cold. Taking over what? My son's finances. His future. She said Daniel would have wanted her to raise him. That was the line. Margaret wasn't just trying to control money anymore. She was trying to control a child. I met Claire and her lawyer the next day. Together, we reviewed everything: Daniel's hidden account, Margaret's involvement, the intimidation attempts. The lawyer's face hardened with every detail. She's overreaching, he said, and that works against her. For the first time, Margaret's tactics were being documented, carefully, methodically, legally. When Margaret learned Claire had legal representation, she panicked. She called me one last time. You think you've won, she hissed. You've destroyed everything. No, I replied calmly. I uncovered it. You were nothing without Daniel, and now, I said, I'm something without you. I hung up. Weeks passed. The tension eased slowly, like a storm moving offshore. Margaret's calls stopped. The messages from extended family quieted. The demand letter went nowhere. But the greatest shift was internal. I stopped introducing myself as Daniel's widow. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I sacrificed. I stopped apologizing for surviving. One afternoon, I received a drawing in the mail. It was from Claire's son, a simple picture to stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. On the back, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being kind to my mom." I cried when I saw it, not out of sadness but relief. That night, I realized something I never expected. The truth had taken my past from me, but it had given me my future. And just when I thought the story was finally settling, a phone call came that changed everything. It was from the lawyer. "We've uncovered something else," she said. "Something Margaret never wanted you to see." My heart pounded. "What?" I asked. She paused. "Daniel didn't just leave secrets behind," she said. "He left a will. And according to that will, nothing was what Margaret claimed it to be." When the lawyer said the word will, my stomach dropped. "I was told there wasn't one," I said immediately. "Margaret said Daniel never finalized it. That's what she wanted everyone to believe," the lawyer replied calmly. "But he did finalize it, 2 years before his death." My hands went cold. "How did you find it?" I asked. "It surfaced during a routine follow-up with the bank tied to the hidden account," she explained. "Margaret attempted to access funds she wasn't authorized to touch. That triggered a deeper review." Of course it did. We met the next morning in her office. The document sat between us on the desk, thin, unassuming, yet heavy with consequences. I stared at Daniel's signature at the bottom. Familiar, steady, real. "He was very specific," the lawyer said. "Almost careful, careful." That word hurt more than reckless would have. She began to explain. Daniel had divided his estate into 3 clear portions. The first portion went to me, his wife, at the time of death. Not everything, but enough to ensure stability. Accounts I knew about, assets we shared. The second portion went into a trust for his son, not controlled by Margaret, not controlled by Claire, controlled by a neutral trustee, to be released in stages when the child reached certain ages. My chest tightened. "So, he planned for him?" "Yes," she said, quietly, legally. "And the third portion?" "Margaret received a fixed sum. One-time. No monthly support. No dependency clause. No ongoing obligation. The room felt unbearably still. "So all these years," I whispered. "She knew," the lawyer finished. "She knew she wasn't entitled to continued support from you or anyone else." The rage that surged through me this time was different, colder, sharper. "She lied," I said. "Yes," the lawyer replied. "And more than that, she attempted to override Daniel's expressed wishes." My mind raced. The money I sent Margaret every month had never been required. Not morally, not legally, not even by Daniel himself. I thought back to every time she'd said, "Daniel would want this." It was a lie. Daniel had already decided what he wanted, and she ignored it. "What happens now?" I asked. The lawyer slid another document toward me. "We notify her formally, and we secure the trust. And the money I sent her." She hesitated. "You could pursue recovery. It would be justified." I shook my head. "No." She raised an eyebrow. "I don't want it back," I said. "I want it to stop being powered." She nodded slowly. "Then this will end it." Margaret was notified that same week. She did not take it well. She called me from an unknown number, her voice trembling not with sadness, but fury. "You went behind my back," she screamed. "You went behind Daniel's," I replied. "He wouldn't have done this to me." "He did," I said quietly. "You just didn't like his decision." She tried everything after that. She accused the lawyer of fraud. She claimed I manipulated Daniel. She even implied the will was forged. But facts don't bend for emotions. The trust stood. Her access was denied, and her narrative collapsed. Word spread through the family slowly at first. Then, all at once, documents have a way of silencing gossip. People who once scolded me began apologizing. Others stayed quiet, ashamed. Margaret withdrew. No more calls, no more messages, no more threats. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. One afternoon, Claire invited me to her son's birthday party. I hesitated. This was unfamiliar territory, new, uncharted, fragile. But I went. I watched him blow out candles, his face glowing with excitement. I watched Claire laugh freely, unburdened. I watched a life unfolding without secrets. Margaret wasn't there, and no one missed her. As I drove home that evening, I thought about how strange justice is. It doesn't always come with punishment. Sometimes, it comes with exposure. With truth standing quietly in the open, no longer needing defense. But just when I thought Margaret had finally accepted defeat, a letter arrived, handwritten, shaky, apologetic, or so it seemed. The first line read, "You took everything from me. Now I have nothing left to lose." And I knew deep in my bones that this wasn't over yet, because people who lose control don't seek peace, they seek damage. I read the letter 3 times before my hands started shaking. Margaret's handwriting was uneven. The ink pressed hard into the paper as if she'd written it in anger. There was no apology in it, not really, just blame wrapped in self-pity, and a warning thinly disguised as grief. "You humiliated me. You turned my own family against me. I hope you're satisfied." The final line sat, alone at the bottom of the page. Some truths should stay buried. I didn't need a lawyer to tell me what that meant. Margaret still had something she thought could hurt me. For the first time since this nightmare began, fear crept back in, not fear of losing money or reputation, but fear of losing peace. I had fought too hard to reclaim my life to let her drag me back into chaos. I showed the letter to my lawyer anyway. "She's posturing," she said, "but we shouldn't underestimate her. People who feel powerless often act irrationally." "What should I do?" I asked. "Document everything," she replied, "and don't engage." I followed her advice. I scanned the letter, logged the date, saved it with the rest of the evidence. Then I locked it away and tried to move forward. But Margaret didn't stop at letters. 2 weeks later, my manager called me into her office. "Is there something you need to tell me?" she asked gently. My heart dropped. "About what?" She hesitated. "We received an anonymous email. It raised concerns about your integrity." I felt the room spin. "What kind of concerns?" She slid her laptop toward me. The email was long, detailed, carefully written. It accused me of emotional manipulation, financial coercion, and taking advantage of a grieving elderly woman. It even suggested I'd been involved in financial impropriety after my husband's death. None of it was true. All of it sounded convincing. "I can explain," I said quickly, my voice shaking. "I know," my manager replied. "That's why I wanted to talk to you first." I provided documentation, bank records, legal correspondence, proof of voluntary payments. By the end of the meeting, her expression softened. "I'm sorry this is happening to you," she said. "We'll handle it internally." I walked out with my job intact, but my hands were trembling. Margaret had crossed a line. That night, Claire called me, panicked. She contacted my son's school. She said she told them she was his grandmother and that I was hiding him from family. They called me in for a meeting. My chest tightened. "Did she say anything else?" "She implied I was unstable." Claire whispered that I shouldn't have full custody. That was it. Margaret wasn't just lashing out. She was trying to burn everything around her. The next morning, our lawyers moved quickly. Cease and desist letters were issued. Schools and workplaces were notified of potential harassment. Documentation was filed. Every move Margaret made was recorded. When she received the legal notice, she finally responded, not with rage, but with desperation. She showed up at my apartment again. This time, she looked smaller, thinner, older. "I just want my family back," she said, tears streaking her face. I didn't open the door fully. "You don't get to terrorize people and call it love," I said. "I'm his mother," she sobbed. "I matter." "You mattered," I replied softly, "until you decided control was more important than truth." She reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "I gave you 5 years of loyalty," I continued, "more than anyone asked for, more than you deserved. This ends now." Her face twisted, not in sadness, but in realization. She had lost. Margaret left without another word. Days passed, then weeks. The harassment stopped. No more emails, no more letters, no more surprise visits. The silence this time felt different. Months later, I sat across from Claire at a park, watching her son play on the swings. He waved at us, laughing, carefree. "He's doing well," she said. "The trust is secure. Therapy is helping." I nodded, feeling a quiet sense of closure. "I never thought I'd say this," I admitted, "but I'm glad the truth came out." She smiled sadly. "So am I." As the sun dipped low, I realized something profound. But Margaret had tried to bury the truth to protect herself. Instead, she buried her power, and in doing so, she freed all of us. But the story didn't end with Margaret's disappearance, because the final lesson, the one that changed me forever, came later. In a place I didn't expect, from someone I didn't expect, and it would redefine what loyalty truly means. Life has a strange way of testing you one last time, just when you think the storm has passed. 6 months after Margaret vanished from our lives, I received a call from a hospital I didn't recognize. At first, I assumed it was a wrong number, but when the nurse said Margaret's name, my stomach dropped. She listed you as her emergency contact, the nurse explained. She was admitted last night. I closed my eyes. Of course she did. I'm no longer in contact with her, I said carefully. The nurse hesitated. We understand, but she specifically asked for you. I sat in silence for a long moment, memories and resentment colliding inside me. I owed Margaret nothing, not my time, not my energy, not my forgiveness, but something inside me, something human, something final needed closure. I'll come, I said. The hospital room was dim, filled with the steady hum of machines. Margaret looked frail, smaller than I remembered, her sharp edges softened by illness. For a brief second, I almost didn't recognize her. You came, she whispered. I didn't come for you, I replied honestly. I came for myself. She nodded weakly. I made mistakes, she said. I did what I thought I had to. No, I said gently. You did what you wanted to. Tears slid down her cheeks. I lost everything. You lost control, I corrected. There's a difference. She turned her head toward the window. I was afraid of being alone. So was I said quietly, but I didn't destroy lives to avoid it. She was silent for a long time. Then she said something I never expected. Daniel loved you, she whispered, in his own broken way. I felt no comfort in that. He should have loved the truth more, I replied. She nodded faintly. I taught him to hide. That confession hung in the air like smoke. I won't forgive you, I said calmly, but I release you. Her eyes filled with confusion. I won't carry this anymore, I continued. What you did ends with me. Margaret closed her eyes, exhausted. As I stood to leave, she reached out weakly. Tell the boy, I'm sorry. I will tell him nothing, I said softly. That's not my place. And with that, I walked away. Margaret passed away 2 weeks later. There was no dramatic funeral, no grand reconciliation, just a quiet notice, a few distant relatives, and a woman who left the world, much like she lived, holding tightly to things that were never truly hers. I didn't attend the service. Instead, I went somewhere else. I visited Daniel's grave. I hadn't been there in years. I stood before the stone, reading his name, the dates that marked a life far more complicated than I ever knew. I spoke out loud for the first time. You hurt me, I said, but you also freed me. The wind moved gently through the trees, indifferent to my words. I forgive you, I added, not because he deserved it, but because I did. As I turned to leave, I realized something that stunned me. I felt light. The secrets were no longer mine to carry. The lies no longer shaped my story, and for the first time since his death, Daniel's shadow no longer followed me. But the final chapter of this journey didn't come from the past. It came from a choice, one that would define the rest of my life. Because healing isn't just about letting go. Sometimes it's about deciding what you stand for next. The end of grief doesn't arrive with a loud announcement. It slips in quietly, almost unnoticed, like the moment you realize you're breathing without effort again. After Margaret's death, there was no sense of victory, only finality. The legal matters closed quickly. The trust for Daniel's son remained untouched, protected exactly as it was meant to be. Claire moved to a different city, closer to her parents, chasing a life that no longer required looking over her shoulder. We stayed in contact, though gently, respectfully, to women bound by truth, not obligation. And me, I began again, not in some dramatic, cinematic way. No sudden relocation, no reckless reinvention, just small, deliberate choices, each one mine. I sold the apartment that held too many echoes of who I used to be. I moved somewhere brighter, somewhere quiet, somewhere that didn't know my story unless I chose to tell it. I stopped defining myself as the woman who survived. I became simply a woman who lived. One afternoon, while cleaning out old boxes, I found the last receipt of the $200 transfer, the final one I never sent. I stared at it for a long time, for years. That money represented loyalty, love, duty, sacrifice. Now, it represented a lesson. Love without truth is control. Loyalty without honesty is manipulation. And sacrifice without choice is not virtue, it's erasure. I shredded the paper and felt nothing but peace. Months later, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since Daniel's funeral, former colleague who once told me I looked brave. We had coffee. We talked. We laughed easily. When he asked about my past, I didn't lie, but I didn't bleed either. Some stories no longer need retelling to be valid. One day, a letter arrived from Claire. Inside was a photo, her, son older now, taller, smiling widely, standing in front of a science fair project. On the back, she wrote, "He wants to help people when he grows up. I think Daniel would have liked that. Thank you for protecting him, even when you didn't have to." I sat with that for a long time. I had spent years honoring the dead. In the end, the most meaningful thing I did was protect the living. People sometimes ask if I regret sending that money for so long. I don't, because it showed me who I was. And when the truth finally surfaced, it showed me who I refused to become. If there is one thing this journey taught me, it's this. You can be kind without being weak. You can be loyal without being blind. And you can walk away without being cruel. My husband died years ago. Every month, I sent his mother $200. But then, one chose myself. And that choice saved my life. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, the strongest endings come from finally telling the truth.